Hello, I'm Dr.GeneAitken, and welcome to the session this afternoon. We're going to talk a little bit about jazz and how we listen to it and the things that go into rehearsal to make performances a lot better. Jazz is a music that it's an indigenous music to the United States of America. It essentially began in the early 20s, late 1916, 17, 18. And it's a form of music that is created through improvisation, but along with the improvisation goes an element of what we call time. So those two elements of improvisation and time are essential for jazz. Jazz is a very creative art in the sense that sometimes you have a melody and then you improvise over the melody or improvise over the changes. And it makes jazz a very type of music that's very expressive, and it's based on the foundations of the person who's learning about jazz to listen to people who have played jazz and to practice their scales and their chords and all the essential elements that make up being a good musician. As a classical musician, you must learn your scales and chords and all your etudes and so forth, but it's the same thing with jazz. The difference between jazz and other music is the interpretation of the notation, where in classical music it's a straight 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. In jazz, the basic foundation is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, so dee, da, 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 da. However, in jazz, when we get to certain types of jazz, then we're looking at rock, which is an even eighth note. We're looking at some types of Latin music, and many Latin music is just an even eighth note also. So it depends on the style of music you're playing, but the essential element of that is improvisation and what we call time, where you have meter that goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's much, and you use the creative aspect of improvisation to go along with that. There are various types of jazz that are available for people to learn, to play, and to listen to. One could be what we call the bebop area, where jazz is more so aggressive, and where you have the cool area, say of Chet Baker and against Charlie Parker with the bebop style. So two different styles of music that are both jazz, but have the interpretations of the element of time and the element of improvisation. And while you're playing this music, you're also concentrating on having a good sound. You're listening to others in your organization, because they're usually small groups. So you will be listening while you are playing. You'll be listening to the piano and the bass and the drums and the other instruments within the organization. Jazz is a music that has a lot of features in the sense of having small groups, large groups, and the interaction of the musicians, of the individual musicians. Whereas in orchestra, you may have interaction between your different sections. Within the smaller groups of jazz, you have interaction between the individuals. And as you're working and playing in a small group, you get ideas from the other players as you're playing the music. It's very important because you not only have the small group jazz, you have your trios and quartets, but then you have your septets and octets, and then you have your big bands as well. And even today, you're actually working with jazz in American or other European orchestras where you have large groups playing jazz, and it is very appealing to the audience to go and listen to people create music on the spot, not necessarily play what's written on the page, but to create music on the spot. And you interact as a player, you interact with the audience, you interact with the different members of the group, of the ensemble. The elements of jazz music are improvisation and time. Usually we can learn improvisation through knowing our scales and our chords, and then we listen to other players play, and that's all well and good. But there's an element of what we call time, where you're, as a player, you're thinking a 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, where you have energy. It's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, but it has a little bit of an edge on it, of a 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, which throughout the piece, as you're working together with other musicians, this grows and influences and actually brings your audience into the group, and the audience essentially becomes part of that group. When we talk about improvisation and we talk about rhythm and other elements of jazz, rhythm essentially is what we call time. You have a rhythm section in a small ensemble, but then you have rhythm, but we refer to this rhythm aspect as really time. So it's the element of time that is involved with the organization and the creative aspect, and of people working with each other in a small group as well as a larger ensemble, such as say a big band or a 10-piece organization that are formed. But there are various sizes of jazz organizations that can come from 2 people up to a full orchestra. So it covers the gamut of the number of people that are involved in a jazz performance. I mentioned earlier that two of the essential elements in jazz are improvisation and time. The third element of jazz, which is very, very important, is that of articulation, where a classical player will play dee-ya-dee-ya-dee-ya-dee-ya-dee. A jazz player will go dee-da-ee-da-ee-da-ee-da-ee. They'll attack the offbeat of the number. So that gives the element of jazz 3 elements that are really quite different than other music. So the element of articulation is extremely important. In articulation, we call that back accent tonguing. And then another element that we use is called a ghost note, where in classical music you'll go dee-da-doo-dat, and in jazz you go dee-do-dat, dee-do-dat, and in classical music dee-do-dat, dee-da-doo-dat, dee-da-doo-dat, dee-do-dat. So it's a little bit more relaxed approach in the use of articulation. It's where you accent and tongue the offbeats. Where in classical music you tongue the downbeats, in jazz you articulate the offbeats. And some of the groups that you have in the jazz medium is you could have everything from a duet up to a big band. A duet, usually a small duet, would be piano and bass. Sometimes you can get with piano and drums. And then if you have a trio, you would have piano, bass, and drums. And then that's the foundation of your jazz group. And then you could add horns such as a trumpet or a saxophone or a trombone. You could add another rhythm section player by guitar. And then you build your groups up from there. You have what we call sextets and octets and septets. And that's 6 or 7 musicians you can still play and organize sound. And that goes all the way up to a big band, which is 5 saxes, 4 trombones, 4 trumpets, and 3 or 4 rhythm section players. And that can even increase further to where you add strings to it. And you could add strings in terms of, you could add a string quartet, you could add a full orchestra. So the variety of ensembles that are available in jazz are just, especially with some of the newer foreign instruments that can be part of jazz. But it's a way, jazz is a music of self-expression, in the sense that you're trying to express yourself through your creativity. And you use these elements of articulation and time and improvisation. Within a big band, you have several sections. You have the trumpet section, you have the trombone section, you have the saxophone section, and you have the rhythm section. All of those 4 sections must work together. The sections could be a number of sizes. You could have 3 trumpets and 2 trombones, or 4 trumpets and 3 trombones, or 4 trumpets, 4 trombones, 5 saxes, 4 saxes. But anything above, say, 9 pieces is usually going to be considered a big band. So in those organizations, then these different ensembles within the organization, we have 4 sections. You have the trumpet section, trombone section, saxophone section, and rhythm section. They must work together individually, and then they also must work together within the ensemble. So it requires a great deal of listening and on the part of the musicians, and it requires an element of mastery of their instrument. The mastery of their instrument comes from the foundation of learning classical music. In other words, all jazz musicians learn how to play their horn, how to play their horns, and they do that through studying classical music, classical foundation. Then as they get the foundation, then they can go on to classical music, or they can go on to symphonic music, they can go on to jazz, they can go on to rock and everything. But having a good foundation as a musical instrument player is essential to help your self-expression and to help you communicate with the audience. Jazz standards are tunes that are considered that you would play, that you must know if you're going to do an improvisation session or a jam session. It could be like, what is this thing called Love, Green Dolphin Street. Any of the standard American tunes can be used for what we call a jazz standard. And then the jazz group will usually play the melody. We usually do some improvisation, and then at the end they'll play the melody out and put an ending on it. If you're looking to enjoy jazz, then it's good for you to listen to jazz music. As you listen to jazz and get ideas from friends or from relatives of, say, might be Oscar Peterson Trio, might be Dave Brubeck Trio, and listen to that music for a while and see if you really like that. And if you really like that music, then explore, maybe getting some ideas from other people to listen to music. But the most important part in jazz is just sitting down and listening to it and enjoying the music. And if you want to become a jazz player, it's really important for you to listen. That's the most important. Listen to a lot of recommendations of people who say, well, this is a good person to listen to, this is another good person to listen to. Listening is the key to becoming a better musician and a better jazz player. Hope you've enjoyed our session this afternoon. We'll be glad to be with you, and we'll say goodbye for now.